when it comes to betrayal, Matt, it strikes to the very core of the safety in a relationship, but also us as individuals, right? Who I am in this relationship.
Welcome, friends, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. I'm glad to have Kaleb Beyer on the line here today.
Looking forward to our discussion here, Matt.
Our listeners may notice a little bit of a decrease in sound quality here in this episode. We hope that you can bear with us on that. But we're able to connect through sound waves, audio waves, cyber waves. I don't even know what kind of waves these are anymore. So we've got a especially, I think, sensitive and important topic to discuss here today, Kaleb, and that is sexual betrayal. And you have recently updated our website at accounseling.org with a web page devoted to sexual betrayal with a number of links. I've spent some time on that and have found it to be just loaded with really important content. Mm-hmm. And I really would like Kaleb to just highlight that and really provide some much needed hope in this space as it concerns marriages with sexual betrayal. And I want to set up a little bit the forest for the trees a little bit and then turn to you and start to define and flush out what we mean by sexual betrayal. We'll start there. Mm-hmm. But you really nicely in the webpage lay out, as you call them, 6 signposts of this journey through sexual betrayal. Mm-hmm. And those signposts are disclosure, trauma, triggers, addictions, boundaries, and forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Those 6 words are heavily loaded with important content to help coach a couple through these difficult waters. There's something to know with each of those. Mm-hmm. And I'm also here in this setup part here, Kaleb. This conversation is not just to the betrayed. It is also to the betrayer. Mm-hmm. We want to speak to this issue to both because both are precious in God's sight.
Yes,
both
absolutely.
Are precious in our sight, and both are precious in the marriage's sight. It's so critical.
Yeah, critical. And really, Matt, just a really different reality. And as you walk through even these signposts, their experiences in those different places is going to look very differently. And sometimes that can be a very frustrating and difficult, painful part of the process.
Each of these signposts take a different nuance, whether I'm betrayed or whether I am the betrayer.
Yes.
But I think really critical information for each. Mm-hmm. Let's start with sexual betrayal. What is it? Help us understand what it is we're talking about. Mm-hmm.
So sexual betrayal focuses specifically on betrayal in the area of sexual relationship. So there's many types of betrayals we could communicate. Certainly here we're talking about a sexual betrayal. So that is it, acting out in a sexual way despite covenantal vow to remain faithful. And so this can come in the form, Matt, of an affair of a one-night stand. It can come in an ongoing affair that's happening over months, years. It can also happen through pornography as well, or sexting. And so any kind of acting out sexually outside of the context of marriage and the covenantal relationship and vow that was made, we would refer to as sexual betrayal.
And I think that's really helpful for us to see that because each of those are different. We're going to try to paint with some fine brushings, but we can't escape the broad brushes as well. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about sexual betrayal, we're talking about lots of nuanced situations that are all very different. I mean, you take the affair, for example, that might be emotion-laden, and to a sex addict who, has a different emotional component.
Yeah.
Am I right about that?
Absolutely. And even within affairs, Matt, what we find is there's different context for making sense of how it came to be that affair happened. And so there are many nuances in each of these scenarios. And so we are painting a fairly broad brush and also recognizing there are specific, unique qualities to each of these that are helpful. And really one of the signposts is understanding and recognizing that uniqueness.
Here we're only a few minutes into this topic, and our listeners know that this is a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
And we appreciate that this is going to strike very near to many's experience. Why don't you maybe speak to that
for sure. Yeah. When it comes to betrayal, Matt, really there is a deep sense of rejection and even abandonment, what we refer to as abandonment, that happens. And so it strikes to the very core of both relationally, the safety in a relationship, but also us as individuals, right? Who I am in this relationship. And so those are, of any emotions and pain, the most intense. And so as a result of that, as we walk through some of these topics and share some examples, they could be triggering based on where couples are at in this stage of recovery. Triggering meaning it could produce and create intense, overwhelming emotions that you may need to pause the podcast and come back later. But we just want to acknowledge, certainly that's not our intent, but it isn't uncommon for those things to happen as we're walking through this.
Well, maybe I'm going to capture, I think, an important word that you used there, Kaleb, that I think is very hope-filled, and that's recovery. You mentioned the road to recovery. So maybe let's say here at the outset, recovery is possible?
Yes, absolutely.
But recovery can be painful.
Yes, it is.
Maybe it will be painful.
It is confusing, it's disorienting, and so I think having some guideposts or signs along the way that can help in the recovery process can be somewhat grounding in a very chaotic, confusing, intensely painful journey of recovery.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Signposts are very hopeful in the process of moving from point A to point B. As long as I continue seeing signs of where I'm going, I know I'm on the road.
Yeah.
So I really love that, and I would really like to cast this whole conversation in the hope of recovery. To our listeners, you heard Kaleb's disclaimer to simply say, if this has been near to your experience, it might trigger some thoughts, some anxiety, or perchance. Take a step back, give yourself space for that, but take hope also. Kaleb's going to lay out a bit of a roadmap for recovery, which is excellent. So I'm excited about that.
Yep, looking forward to it.
Let's start with disclosure is the first signpost. And I think this really speaks to the different nuances of the sexual betrayal event or events. Tell us what disclosure is and what we mean by that, why it's important, and then we're probably going to need to uncover a little bit about the do's and don'ts.
Yep. So disclosure, you can think of it as the confession or the sharing of truth, what actually happened. Okay? So when a betrayal happens, when we think through the process of recovery, this is like the foundation, Matt, is what is truth. The truth needs to be known. Right? There needs to be an understanding of what happened, because for the one who's been betrayed, I've been living out of reality that apparently wasn't truth. For how long, I don't know, but we need to fill in the gap. We need to make sense of this so that, again, we can move into safety, which is the next rung on this building trust. So the foundation is truth. And in this truth, one of the critical things, Matt, that we find in trust rebuilding is that the betrayed sees an outright and open confession and a sorrow for the sin, the betrayal that's taken place in the one that's betrayed.
Okay, so you've already launched into some specifics here, but even to back up and say truth is the foundation here. And the nature of betray means that I have been deceived in what has not been true. So there is a complete reset that needs to start at that truth level.
It's not uncommon as couples walk through that for the betrayer to perhaps not want to disclose information because they don't want to hurt their spouse. And so it is critical at the outset that there is a complete disclosure, and we'll talk more about what that means, but that there's not truth kind of titrated out over time, because what that leads to is continued betrayals ongoing. What else is there? That's the difficult thing for the betrayed.
It is important to be clear so that we're not dripping out more details over time. And you're suggesting that it's important in this disclosure that we really do it well. That's what I'm hearing.
Yep.
Immediately, my mind goes to, now just how much detail should be conveyed? Is there some bookends on that?
Yep. When we think about disclosure, we would caution from two ditches. And that is, one is too little information. The disclosure is general in nature. For example, it happened somewhere in the time of December. I think there was a couple of occasions. I'm not sure what else happened, right? So just general in nature, I forgot. And it's not uncommon, Matt, for the one who has betrayed to not remember everything. It is important to prayerfully, mindfully take time and realize this is an important piece that for them to be intentional in is helpful in rebuilding trust for their spouse. And so taking that effort, but being too general isn't helpful. On the other hand, being too specific, Matt, being detailed. So for example, talking about what the affair partner was wearing or specific emotions that the affair partner was. What we want to refrain from is re-traumatizing someone who's already been betrayed. And so we need enough information to make sense of what happened, where it happened, when it happened, right?
How much it cost?
How much it cost, absolutely. There was
where that money came from?
Yes, all those are really helpful pieces of information. But there comes a line, Matt, when we move into specifics. And so what I really encourage spouses who have been betrayed is before you want an answer to a question, if you're wondering, is this too much detail, is to sit on it for at least 24 hours and pray about it and consider, is this information you want to be knowing for the rest of your life? Is it helpful in the sense of rebuilding trust, or is it purely answering a question? Yes, about curiosity.
I do think, and you've mentioned there's some gray here between these bookends, and I think that's apparent. But what kind of crystallized for me is on the maybe too detailed spectrum. It would be those things that reproduce the image and the clarity so that the betrayed can replay that trauma. We want to avoid that.
Yes.
But yet having the clarity to have all the dots filled in to say, oh, that's why he or she came home a day late from the business trip, right?
Yes.
That's when it happened. To have the story is really critical.
Yep.
Kaleb, would there be some value in having a third party present for a confessional, whether it be a mentor, a minister, an elder, a good friend? Could that be helpful?
Absolutely, Matt. Including someone else that's a safe person to be able to speak into ways of doing it in a helpful way. Even simple things like perhaps thinking where this confession would happen, right? Things like that, that again, help and support a healthy way of moving through this process. I would certainly encourage it because for each of us, Matt, when we're at a place of distress, our ability to think and reason clearly and rationally is compromised. It just is. And so I think that is acknowledging that is to bring others in who are mentors or trusted people or a counselor, whatever it may be, to support this process.
And then I know as I looking at the web page and followed some of the links that you had there, it was suggested to write it out. That might be an excellent way to consolidate your thoughts or at least to get those down. Is that fair?
Yep, I think it is fair. It is for the one that is betrayed when their spouse takes the time, the energy to thoughtfully, painstakingly go through and recount what they can. It begins to communicate a message that I'm open and transparent, right? And I think that's the important piece in the process of writing it out, thinking about it, and it takes a little bit. You can't do it in one setting, of course, but I think that's helpful and important.
Being willing to go through that pain says a lot.
It does.
To our spouse, doesn't it?
It honors their pain. Yes.
Yeah. You know what, Kaleb? And I pushed this off because I wanted to come back to it. But originally, as you were talking about disclosure, you talked about remorse. and you talked about, repentance being a part of that disclosure. So I would like to highlight that. What does that important piece look like?
Mm-hmm. Yep. The one who has betrayed their spouse, for them to connect with the pain that it has caused, that their actions, right, their choices, and being able to understand the depth of the pain that they've caused their spouse that leads to a sorrow, a confession, that it isn't, I got caught. It isn't minimizing. It's not blaming. That means no excuses, which is really hard. And for the one who has been the betrayer, this may take some work and time and their own process to get to that point. But it is important to not make excuses at all, because at the end of the day, it is important for the one who's betrayed to know they are not responsible for the behaviors that the betrayer engaged.
Yeah.
Period. Certainly there's a context out of which the betrayed did that, and we need to understand that in time, but that does not mean that in any way the spouse is responsible for the affair, for the pornography use, for any of that.
Yeah. And you know what, Kaleb? I think what's also really important here, as painful as this process is, and part of what's painful is seeing the pain of our spouse, seeing they're betrayed, seeing that in and of itself is really important for us, isn't it? To see the pain that my spouse is going through. As much as I would like to sugarcoat and protect him or her, actually that pain helps me understand perhaps the depth of my behavior and is very useful in going forward.
It is, and I appreciate you sharing this. It is critical in going forward. It is also important, I think, just to acknowledge for the one that has betrayed, there is a tremendous amount of shame involved, both for the betrayer and the betrayed. But in this case, for the one that has betrayed their spouse, sometimes, Matt, I've found it in working with couples that because of their own shame that wells up inside of you when you think about what you did, it can be easy to get caught in that and not be present with my spouse's shame. It's just overwhelming. It's too much. I cannot do it. And so that's just to acknowledge, like you're saying there, that is incredibly difficult to sit with. And so again, it may require some individual work to get to a place that I can both sit with the pain of my spouse without shutting down, minimizing, or going into just getting caught up in shame, which is really hard. Yeah. It's really hard.
So we've talked about disclosure, and remember, these are signposts here. We're not done with the journey. And so the next one you have there has to do with trauma and understanding trauma. Fill out this piece a bit.
The next signpost here is trauma. Research shows that in sexual betrayal, nearly 69% of individuals that experience sexual betrayal experience what's called relational trauma. And you can think of trauma in short as it's an intense, highly aroused state of individuals that is one that they don't feel safe. They're constantly in a state of not feeling safe, right?
Okay.
There's a lot that goes into that. But the important piece here, Matt, is to educate yourself, and I would say for both spouses, as to what trauma is, how it impacts people, the effect it has on emotions and communication. And
so I really hear what you're saying here is this disclosure launches us in a new world. It launches us in a completely new world that they have not been in yet. And that new world can be understood partially through the lens of what we call trauma. And if you are not aware of trauma, how it impacts people, then you're not going to understand how your spouse is processing the disclosure, how they're processing the next day after. And it's very critical, remember, because we're going the long distance here of recovery. It's very critical for us to understand the climate, the landscape, this place that we're at And trauma is a filter through which we need to understand it.
Yes, well stated, Matt. And I think it leads to empathy. Really what we're wanting to move towards is empathy and understanding. The goal is to lead to empathy of my spouse's experience.
Yes, yeah. Trauma is part of how we understand that experience.
Right. The one who has been the betrayer has living out of reality for months or years. And so for them, in one sense, it's not new. But for their spouse's sense, the disclosure marks the date at which that's the reality. The one that has been living out of the false reality that is a betrayer now feels freedom and feels light and more hopeful, but yet this same information is what shatters and leads to shock and denial and pain for their spouse. And that's just difficult.
And so really the call here is understand trauma.
And here's where we're going to hit pause on today's conversation. When we come back, we're going to look at the 4 remaining signposts to recovery from sexual betrayal. Thanks, each one, for being with us.